Good afternoon. My name is Connie, and I, along with Anna, Emily, Jeremy, and Sophia, study caregiver mobility choices and risk. As most of you are probably aware, children across the world are facing threats to their well-being and mental health. These stem from lack of autonomy and active mobility. We all know we're happier when we're moving around and interacting with our peers. So why has this happened? Dr. Majanapal reminded us that children need at least 60 minutes a day, 3 times a week of vigorous exercise. And active mobility is a really great way for us to incorporate that into our daily lives. But even here in the Netherlands, the cycling mecca of the world, the rates of children cycling to schools is declining. And so we wondered if safety concerns were playing a role in these declines and how that might vary across cultural backgrounds. So we settled on the research question: to what extent does risk perception influence modal choice in school commutes within Amsterdam's diverse districts?
So we focused on 2 districts, Zoud and Zuidoost. And before we go into more details about our research project, we wanted to give you some quick context and a brief history about these districts. So starting with Zoud, Zoud's planning started in the early 1900s with visionary urban plans like Plan Zoud. And the legacy of this plan is still visible in Zoud's monumental blocks, human scale design, and green spaces. A lot of the buildings in Zoud are also in alignment with the Amsterdam School of Design. Today, Zoud is one of the most prosperous districts in the city. It has the highest average income per household, a high Western population, and a low poverty rate. The other neighborhood we chose to look at was Zuidoost. Zuidoost, as you can see in the map in the corner there, is an exclave. It was designed not to be part of the city, but as a residential utopia with Le Corbusier-inspired high-rises, ample parking infrastructure, wide roads, and separated transport lanes for pedestrians, bikes, and cars. And the effect of that infrastructure, those separated lanes, still affects the frequency of their use today. But going back to the history, the utopian plan ended up that it failed. It failed to attract residents from the city center, and there was high vacancy in Zuidoost until around the 70s, when migration from former colonies and other factors filled the high rises, which then became neglected. And Zuidoost became stigmatized for crime and poverty, and to an extent, those stigmatizations still exist today. However, there's nuance here. Of course, that's what I am. Okay, there's nuance here, and that's important, and that's why we wanted to give this brief history and context before going into our research. Today, Zoud is a vibrant cultural melting pot of over 130 nationalities. There's been great economic growth in the region, renewal projects to replace those old high-rises with a lot of new low-rise buildings, and efforts to better connect the district, both physically and socially, with the rest of the city.
So moving on to our pilot project itself, our research methodology comprised of 3 parts: observations, interviews, and comparisons. For the observations, we split up into groups and went to 5 schools, 3 from Zuidoost and 2 from Zoud. We were able to observe 382 children in total, arriving in 3 different transport modes: biking, walking, or by car. We also distinguished within these categories whether they were with a caregiver or not. For the interview questions, we drew upon Dr. Tina Harris's lecture about ethnographies to create the questions that we asked them after observing how they arrived or departed. The first question was, is your mode of transport typical? The second was, why did you choose that versus alternatives? And the third was, does your child ever bike on their own? We designed these questions to add parent voices to create a narrative regarding their thought processes. Originally, we had considered asking them to rate this safety of their district on a scale from 1 to 10, instead of asking about whether their child bikes alone. But then we have decided on choosing the latter question because it speaks to a more emotional perspective, which is a crucial trait of ethnographies as we learned in class. Finally, we analyzed the differences between the two districts by looking at their nodal splits and identifying various themes.
Great. Looking at our observational data first, the first insight we saw was that modal choice really does differ by community. We see that while pedestrian traffic is broadly similar, biking is far more popular in Zoud than it is in Zoudost. And we actually saw a 40% drop comparing these two neighborhoods. Conversely, car usage is much more popular when you look at Zoudost, with a 3x increase in relation. So this tells us there is different modal choices being made, but not why. Our next insight from our observational data was really about that caretaker accompanying the child or not. And here we saw very similar rates across the two districts, with approximately 70% of children in each district arriving with their parent or a caretaker. So this gives us some sense that it's not that, parents in Zoud are perceiving the roads as being safer and therefore choosing more active mobility. They're actually making kind of similar choices about whether to take that safety improving effect of accompanying your child to school. So now we really need to talk to the parents to understand what was happening here. So across our different interviews with parents, we had several themes that jumped out again and again across multiple interviews, multiple districts. The most popular or most common was distance from school. Something being too far to walk, something being not far enough to drive. We saw that make a big difference in sort of what choice they made, as well as whether or not they accompanied their child on that journey. Things like age, a younger child being less likely to go on their own, as well as other road users, and whether their speeds and type of modality is also a key theme that repeated again and again. We see a couple quotes here from some of our interviews, where many angry drivers may not pay attention to small children, maybe not being ready to have a younger child go on their own. So these all were themes that we saw as being connected to risk perception, so a key research question. But that's not the only thing that we saw. We also saw people talk about convenience. Maybe you have to go to work afterwards, and so you need to take a bike to work, so you bring your child on your bike, but you just don't have enough time to let them bike on their own. Similarly, culture is a complicated factor. It has elements of risk, including things like how you perceive the risk of different genders, as well as practical matters, how big your family is, how hard it is to bring them all in accessibility. So one key difference, though, we saw is that only in Zoudoust do we have people reflect on the car being a transport they chose because of that risk of road users. And so together, these give us some sense that that risk perception is driving some behavior along with the cultural factors.
So overall, the perception of risk has a strong influence on both the model choice, but also the children level of autonomy when it comes to committing to schools for both districts. And this perception of risk is not just an abstract fear, it's often linked to a very concrete factor, distance, like the longer the journey, the riskier it seems, and therefore less children bike on their own to schools. So in the Netherlands, the distance is not evenly distributed. We can see that immigrants community often face longer commutes, making independence less feasible for the children. So that's why it's really important to integrate their voices in the conversation about mobility, because without them, we might just overlook barriers for their children to have independence in the city. So the real question is not about if children are ready for the city, but is the city ready for the children? So our starting point was a really simple observation: children bike less to school. And by exploring how risk is perceived by the parents, we uncovered that urban space still fails to support children independence. And as the researcher showed in 2025, that ensuring physical safety for children in cities often leads to spatial segregation, making children less able to navigate urban complexity. So maybe it's time to think of the city not as just a place to protect, but as a space to be shared with and for the children. Thank you.